Hello and welcome to the second of two tutorials on the CQPwebInABox virtual machine with CQPweb in it. While the first one was all about getting set up and getting started, this is a brief look at some of the more advanced stuff that you can do with CQPweb running on a virtual machine in VirtualBox. If you're using some other virtual machine software like VMware or any other, then many of the same things, if not all the same things, are possible, but you'll have to have a look in your documentation to find out exactly how they work. Right, so the first thing that I want to do is to power up the machine from the VirtualBox list of machines and just do a very quick tour of what is on the virtual machine other than what you see in the web interface of CQPweb itself once it powers up, which always takes a little bit longer than I think it's going to take. There it is. Okay, so this is still the completely basic CQPwebInABox that we looked at the last time. I haven't changed anything here. Okay, but what I am going to do is make this a little bit smaller, I think. There we go. So that we've got room for some other stuff on the screen of the virtual machine itself. Of course, the contents of this window correspond precisely to the they correspond precisely to the monitor of a real machine. So just as you can resize windows and move them around on a monitor, you can resize windows and move them around inside this window that represents the virtual machine. This menu, incidentally, at the top, this is the menu that belongs to VirtualBox. It's not part of the virtual machine itself. It's a list of things that you can do with the virtual machine. I'm going to be ignoring that for now, since most of it is also accessible through the manager window, which we saw a minute ago. Right, what was it I wanted to go through? Well, I just wanted to give a bit more detail than I did in the getting set up video about the things that are on the desktop here and the general layout of the computer. Speaking of the general layout of the computer, if you click here on the file manager icon and bring that up, you get something that may or may not be 100% familiar. All operating systems have some kind of file manager that looks vaguely like this, that allows you to explore the computer. If you use an Apple, Mac or another form of Linux, this should be extremely familiar. You have your path here, and you have here on the side you have the directory tree, which gives you all the different sections of the hard drive of a Linux computer. And then up here you have your user folder, which is your own personal folder, and you can do all the usual things like you can choose to see folders as icons or as a list or as a compact list of icons without any details. You can choose to view the information that you've got in a number of different ways. So there it is, File Explorer. If you want to find out what's actually on this machine, then you can have a look through there. Let me just close that. Some things that are useful to know about are on the desktop. The Documents folder here, you may have actually seen it. It's within the user's home folder, but if I open it up, there we go. One of the things that I've added to the Documents folder here is a link to something called Upload Area. Now, Upload Area is what you see in the CQPweb interface if you go to the Admin Control panel and then here under where it says uploads, you've got two options to view the upload area, which gives you all of the files that are in CQPweb currently, and as you can see, the files that are there are currently the ones that were used to set up the two sample corpora, and then you have the upload a file option for importing files to CQPweb. Now, it's very important, if you're not used to virtual machines, to remember that when we say choose a file to upload, we're talking about files on the virtual machine. You can't upload files from the main computer here. It just won't work. So for example, if you click browse there, what you'll get is you'll get the desktop of this system, the user of this system, and that's more or less it. In fact, what this is showing you, this table here in the admin panel, is precisely the same as this area of the disk that you can see here in the file manager. The files here precisely correspond to the files here. So if you want to add a file here, for example when creating a corpus, then the easiest way to do it is simply to move it into this upload area, going through the documents link there. Likewise, I mean, you could go through this upload, but it's a lot less efficient than just using a copy to here, because here you're just copying it to an area of the disk, whereas if you do it through this, then then the CQPweb software has to process the whole thing. So that's the upload area link that you can get to through the documents here. Oh yes, I probably should have specified that when you're using the file manager system here, it's got a number of different views here. You can see either the directory tree, which is the one that you'll be familiar with if you've used things like Windows Explorer, or there's a places view where it just lists the places that the system thinks you're most likely to want to go. I don't really like the places view, but you might. Anyway, back to the desktop and the things that we can see here. You can see there's a rubbish bin that's equivalent to the recycle bin in Windows, or I think on Mac is it called a trash can or something like that. I.e., if you delete stuff, then most of the time it will go into the rubbish bin, rather than being deleted immediately. However, there is right now nothing in the rubbish bin. It's, as you can see, it's one of the places on the places list here. Or alternatively, if I close that, you can get directly to it just by clicking there. Yeah, there's nothing in there yet. However, it's worth noting again, and if you're a Linux old hat, this will seem a bit obvious, but I want to warn people about this. This rubbish bin only applies to things that you delete by pressing the delete key on the desktop. If you delete something using the delete button in CQPweb here, it is gone. Likewise, if you use the command line to delete something, that too doesn't go into the rubbish bin, it's just gone completely. So be aware of that. The two other things that I've put on the desktop for handy reference are, number one is the CQPweb admin manual, which is simply a PDF file containing a copy of the manual that is available on the Corpus Workbench website, explaining how to set up and run a CQPweb server. So all of the full-on technical information is in here, and if you're interested, have a look at chapter 1 to see all the things that you would have had to do if you were installing it normally rather than using the CQPwebInABox system. If you want to do things like tweak the CQPweb configuration, however, chapter 2 here has a list of things that you can do. Chapter 3, which is not finished, explains all the different things that you can do in that admin control panel, i.e. what all of these menu options do. As I say, though, that's not quite finished yet. Then you've got some more advanced stuff lower down. Yes, in fact, not all of the rest of it is finished. Documentation is always a work in progress, unfortunately. So that's there for your convenience. However, um, if you want to do any really serious work, I recommend that you check back with the Corpus Workbench website, link very handily here, because this changes all the time and you'll usually want to be looking at the most recent version. But for just simple reference, that's there. I suppose the thing that bears most comment on here, oops, jumped far too far there. The thing that bears most discussion here is this part where it says about the configuration file. Well, what is a configuration file? Well, if I go back to Firefox here, and we're on the control panel, down here in the menu there is an option here called there is an option down here called PHP configuration. Now, PHP configuration is all about the settings in the PHP environment that are relevant to CQPweb. So it only shows you things in the PHP environment. What it doesn't show you is any of the setup settings for CQPweb itself. For that, you have to look at the configuration file. Now, the configuration file is actually not hard at all to find. You can find it just using the document browser here. In fact, that's what I will do just to make life simple. So it's in the directory tree, and if you go down to this place here where it says slash, and for those of you not familiar with Linux, the slash just means the very top of the hard drive, then you will find the CQPweb configuration file by going through the following steps. First, you go to this folder called var, and inside var, as you can see, there is a folder called www. So go into www, you'll then see a folder called HTML. You go into that, you'll see here is something called CQPweb, and this is the actual CQPweb code. This is where the real program lives. Here it is. The configuration file is in this folder here called lib, and the oh dear, let me turn this into a slightly easier view. Detailed list, there we go. All of these files here are different parts of the CQPweb software. One of these is the configuration file, this one called config.inc.php. So that's here, and this contains the configuration information. Now, what I'm going to do is open it and edit it. What you will normally want to do is use a program called LeafPad. LeafPad, I should have explained that Linux computers like this one can come with all kinds of different desktops. The desktop system I'm using is something called LXDE, which does stand for something, but I'm going to spare you what it actually stands for. That's because LXDE doesn't take up very many resources, so for distributing CQPwebInABox, it made sense to use LXDE. In LXDE, your default text editor is something called LeafPad, which, if I click on it, will open up config.inc.php in this very simple text window. Now, most of these are just default settings, right? You will probably never need to change these. However, if you want to add some of the interesting behaviors listed here in the manual under the CQPweb configuration file, then what you need to do is to add those settings to this file. It's usually fine to just add them at the end. So, for instance, if I click on the chapter for the configuration file and jump there, there is an explanation here about how you add things in, and then a few pages down, come on, here we are. A few pages down, under this heading Optional Configuration Variables, you get the list of things that you can add to tinker with CQPweb setup. Now, most of these are quite technical and you will never need to change them, but sometimes there are things that you might want to change. So, for instance, there is a limit in the system for how big temporary frequency tables on disk can be. And as it says here, the default is 6 gigabytes. So by default, my CQPweb only ever stores temporary frequency tables up to 6 gigabytes. Well, you might say, you might want to use more space than that. Maybe you've got a really big hard drive. It's only you using it, so why not use more space? In which case, you would take the name of this variable, and I'm going to risk copying and pasting it, although copying from a PDF is not always easy. Yeah, it worked that time. So you insert you insert the name of the variable, and you say what you want it to equal. This is the default of what it equals. Incidentally, I'm using Alt-Tab here to jump between windows. So if that's the default, and let's say you want to add another 10 gigabytes, let's stick a 1 on the start there. Is that 10 gigabytes, or have I just added 100 gigabytes? No, that's 10. That's 10 gigabytes. Sorry, arithmetic of gigabytes is not so easy. So there you are. You've altered one of the settings. I'm not actually going to do that. I'm going to leave that as it is, but that's how you do it. And anytime you want to change one of these, you can just keep on adding things. Any of these you can add in. All of these variables, if you add them to the configuration file, you specify what they are. If you don't add them, they have the default values. If you're a non-advanced user, the default variables are the default values are just fine. This is only something for advanced users to play with. So here's one where you can tell Corpus Workbench to use more RAM. That controls the size of the queries that are saved on disk, the size of the space that's available. You've got an option for hiding experimental features. You can twiddle the appearance using these variables here. So here, for instance, is one where I have actually made a change. You can see that homepage welcome message by default is welcome to CQPweb, but in CQPwebInABox I actually changed it. So homepage welcome message, I added this line here to say good evening and welcome to your CQPwebInABox, just so that it would look a bit different when you loaded it. So there's tweaks and adjustments of all kinds you can do here. You can twiddle with the logos, things like that. You can twiddle with whether or not messages appear about things going wrong. Various things. Just looking through things that are going to be interesting. A lot of these are only of any use whatsoever. It has to be said to when CQPweb is running on a server. They don't necessarily make much sense when you're running CQPwebInABox. And all of these marks here in the manual that say to do, this is just the reminder that this document is under constant development and it's never quite finished. Anyway, let me just close that, and no, I won't save, I'll leave it as it is, but obviously if you've made any actual serious changes, then you should say yes, save. If you prefer to do it through the command line, if you're used to the command line, then that's possible as well. Right, what else? Yes, the last thing to mention on the desktop here is this thing called Readme, which is a text file containing an explanation of the things that I've done when setting up CQPwebInABox. So yes, you can see that this is codename Anatolia, which means it's the very first release. The next one is going to be codename B something. I haven't decided what yet. Making up code names for different releases is one of the most exciting bits of this, of course. So you have an explanation here, but you also have some more information. So one thing that I'm going to walk through a little later is this process that is outlined here, which is how to switch on internet access, because this virtual machine has no internet access as set up. That's for security, of course. It has a list of usernames and passwords. There are lots of different accounts used in the creation of a CQPweb installation. And they're all listed here. In each case, I've made the password be the same as the username, which, as I'm sure you know, is horrible, horrible practice. You should never do it. And the only reason I've done it here is because this virtual machine is not actually connected to the internet. If you change that, if you connect this to the internet in the way that I'm going to show later, then you do, I'm afraid, need to go and change all of these passwords so that it's secure and things are not going to break. And then at the bottom you've got a list of how to get the source code of all the different programs that are on this virtual machine, starting with the operating system, Ubuntu, which is, as I've said, a variant of Linux. And then going on to all the various other ones. So you've got various bits of information there. Right, now I do believe that that means we've had the tour, so I am actually going to shut everything down now. And we'll go and have a look at one of the tweaks that I think you're most likely to make, which is to soup up the hardware of this virtual machine. So let's just wait for it to shut down. Right. Now, as you can see here, under System in VirtualBox, where it says Base Memory, that means how much RAM the virtual machine has. And 512 megabytes is half a gigabyte, which is not a lot by modern standards. Most modern computers have a lot more RAM than that. But I set it up in such a way that it wouldn't need a really, really big computer to run it, a really, really powerful computer. On the other hand, you might say, if you have a really, really powerful computer, you might want CQPweb to be making more extensive use of the power that you've got. That's quite easy because you can twiddle with the settings of a virtual machine to give it more or less memory, to give it more or less processing power, and that's all done through something called the settings dialog here. Now you can open up the settings for a computer at any time, but you can only change the settings when the virtual machine is shut down, for obvious reasons. So let's take a look at some of these. So these are the settings for CQPwebInABox. Yes, so the general settings here, what's it called? If you want to change what it's called, you can. It tells you where on the disk it's stored and where it keeps something called snapshots. I'm not going to go into what snapshots are. It tells you here whether there is a shared clipboard. A shared clipboard means that if you copy something on your main computer, you can then paste it inside CQPwebInABox. I recommend leaving that as it is. In fact, I would recommend leaving most of these things as they are. Yes, so those are the general options. Where things get interesting is here, where you have system options, which talk about the hardware that they talk about the hardware that the program is simulating. What kind of thing is it? So it tells you what kind of chip it's simulating, what kind of pointing device it's simulating. A USB tablet? Alright, okay. That doesn't seem to make much difference. As you can see, although it said USB tablet, I never noticed that it was not working like a mouse. It seems to be working perfectly like a mouse to me. Yes. So you've got all kinds of stuff here, but the most interesting thing is this, which is the amount of RAM. As I said, it's currently at 512 megabytes, and my actual computer here has 6 gigabytes. So if I wanted to say, well, I'll let CQPwebInABox use a much larger chunk of my RAM rather than just that, and let's say I want to keep on putting it up. So let's put it to 2048, which is 2 gigabytes. That means I'm giving it 4 times as much memory as it has by default, but I've still got 4 gigabytes left for my actual own computer, which is fine. VirtualBox is usually quite good about warning you if you put in settings that are going to cause trouble. So you can see that I'm here in the green zone, and the green zone means that I'm giving CQPwebInABox memory, but I'm saving enough memory to run my own computer, the host computer, properly. If I push it way up past into 3 or 4 gigabytes, it goes orange. In which point it will say invalid settings detected, and there's a warning down here that pops up saying that there might not be enough memory left, right? So if I'm in the orange zone, I'm in a region where my computer might not have enough memory because too much has been given over to the virtual machine. If I pull it right up into the red, then it will say definitely not enough memory. So basically, as long as you're only going to run one virtual machine at a time, then anything in the red is safe. Anything in the green, sorry, is safe. What does this get you? Basically, it gets you something in terms of query speed, because one of the things that CQP does when you run queries is it loads files into memory, and the more memory you've got, the less time it has to spend unloading and reloading these files. That's a very much simplified explanation, but it will do for now. Basically, for queries to run a little quicker, it pays to give CQPwebInABox more RAM. That's not to say that it won't work if you leave it with 512 megabytes, but if you give it 2 gig, then it'll run faster. This is very often the case with CQPweb, I should point out. It'll run on a really low-powered computer, but it won't run fast, and you do want it to run fast. Okay, here where it says processor, you can decide how many of your CPUs, that is how many of your processing chips, you want to give over to the virtual machine. So I have 8 CPUs on my real machine. Actually, I don't really have 8 CPUs. I have one central processing unit chip which has 8 chips built into it, which is quite common these days. And I'm saying that one of these is given over to the virtual machine, and the other 7 stay with the main computer. And again, I can increase this if I want. I can give the virtual machine 4 of my CPUs and say 4 for the main computer, but if I go further than that, it will start to complain that it's an invalid setting. It's because once you've got more than a certain amount, it makes things worse rather than better. Actually, for CQPweb, more CPUs doesn't actually help all that much because the software runs on just one CPU. Having multiple CPUs makes it possible, if you've got CQPweb running on a web server, you can make it possible for 2 people to be using the web server and to get full speed each. One doesn't hinder the other. But obviously this is just one person's virtual machine on their own desktop, so really it doesn't need more than one CPU. If you were going to start doing other things on the Linux operating system, then you might want to give it a couple more, but if you're just running CQPweb, you don't need more. So let's leave that at 2. All these changes I'm making are, of course, just for illustration. Acceleration, again, I wouldn't tinker with this. If you do, things can go wrong, so leave that alone unless you really know what you're doing. So those are the 2 main ways in which we can soup up the virtual machine and give it more power. By giving it more RAM or by giving it more CPUs. You can also, if you want, give the virtual machine access to more video memory, but of course CQPweb is not very graphics intensive, so it doesn't actually need very much graphical memory. But if you want to give it a lot of video memory, so it's got lots of memory for creating graphics, then go ahead and do it. You can also give it access if you've got multiple monitors plugged into your computer. By default it only has access to one of those monitors, but you can, if you want, increase that up to the maximum. I have two monitors here, and it doesn't. So I can only give it access to two monitors. I can't give it access to more than that. Note that the more monitors it has access to, the more video memory it needs. Anyway, I'm going to put it back down to just one monitor because that's not something that we need. Again, this is something that you might want to think about if you were doing other Linux stuff on your virtual machine as well as that. Then you've got a list of the available hard drives. You can see that there's one hard drive here, which is the single hard drive used by the virtual machine, and you've got details on it here. So it's a 100 gigabyte hard drive, so it'll let you put on up to 100 gigabytes there. But the actual size is 4.9 gigabytes, so that's how much is being used currently. And this is saved on disk as a file, and the size of the file is the amount of disk that you're actually using, whereas the virtual size is the amount that it can actually go up to. So if you want to add a hard drive to create more disk space, or if you want to increase the size of this, then there is something called the Virtual Media Manager that can do that we'll take a look at in a minute. Audio is turned off. That's because I assume that you will not be wanting to play music from your virtual machine, but if you are, go ahead. Network I'll skip for now and come back to later. Serial ports is for whether or not it's supposed to pretend that it's plugged into a printer. I usually ignore that. USB, here is the place where you can tell your computer to send some of your USB devices through to the virtual machine rather than counting them as being plugged into the main machine. So I've got a memory stick plugged into my main machine at the minute, so I'm just unmounting it, and I will see. Does it pop up? It may or may not. I think if I click there, no device is available. Sometimes you have to tinker a bit to make USB devices appear here. Usually I wouldn't bother with it, it's a little bit more trouble than it's worth. Press OK. So that's souping up your RAM and souping up your CPUs. There I've basically talked about how to increase the power of your virtual machine. I also said that I would talk through some other things that you can do here. One of the things that you can do that is quite interesting is that you can clone virtual machines. That is, you can create two different virtual machines here that are both based on a single one. So if you want to do some tinkering with a version of CQPwebInABox, but you also want to keep it the way it was before, then you can do that. It's also possible to do something like create a snapshot. Here are snapshots. If you create snapshots, then that is basically a memory of how the virtual machine is at a particular point in time. I don't usually do that very much, but it's something that is possible. Another thing that's possible and that you might be interested in doing is that if you have, for example, added a load of corpora to your CQPwebInABox and you want to then give that to someone else, that's possible too. Let's assume that I've added, I don't know, 4 or 5 corpora here, and I want to be able to give a copy that a friend or colleague can add to their VirtualBox or VMware or whatever in order to have access to those corpora. In that case, what we do is we export an appliance file. Remember that when we added in CQPwebInABox, we had the OVA appliance file which we imported. Well, you can also export in order to get an OVA file that you can send to someone else. And it's done here with this export appliance setting. So what you do is you pick the virtual machine that you want to export from the list, and then you decide what file you would like to save to in the usual way here. You pick the format. Usually the default is just fine. I'm going to press and then the next one is it gives you settings that you can twiddle with if you like, but really there is no need to. And then when you press export, it will create a big OVA file that contains the entire virtual machine bundled up that you can then give to someone else. Which I'm not going to do now because it takes quite a long while, but that's how you do it. Right, now, and while I was going to deal with those in this video, I've now been going on for somewhat in excess of half an hour, so it's probably time to stop there. So I will do, and I will split off the topics of moving files on and off CQPwebInABox, and then the other topic being switching on the network and using the CQPwebInABox as a full Linux machine. I'll leave those topics to separate videos. So this has ended up being a series of 4 rather than a series of 2, but never mind, these things do indeed have a habit of growing, don't they? Right, I think I will leave it there. Thank you for watching.